Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your location. My name is Florence Stainier. I'm a partner within the investment management practice of Arendt, and I'm very pleased to welcome you today to the first webinar of our 2024 webinar session, which is dedicated to UCITS. Today, our session will focus on the recently issued Circular 856, which has been issued by the CSSF end of March, replacing, as from 1st of January 2025, the old Circular 0277. This was, among others, the occasion for the CSSF to update the scope of the circular, to set out the responsibilities of the different bodies, actors intervening in fund management or administration, to specify also the rules in case of errors of net asset value calculations and investment breach, but also to cover other type of errors or breaches. The purpose of this webinar is to discuss the impact of the recently issued circular on UCITS funds, and in particular to share the views from a practitioner point of view, and also to address how management companies and fund bodies would need to tackle the new content of the circular. This is the reason why today we are very pleased and honored to have with us François Ralet. François is from Wellington Luxembourg S.à. He is actually heading the Wellington AFM based in Luxembourg. Wellington, which manages about 70 UCITS, 10 AF, both based in Luxembourg and Ireland. And also to know that François is a conducting officer in charge of risk management, which is obviously key for us today. We are eager to hear his views from a practitioner point of view. Also with us today, Josiane Schroeder. Josiane is a counsel in our investment management practice, and she has been more particularly involved in some shadow discussion, I would say, of the revamp of the Circular 0277. And from that perspective, we are also looking forward to have her insight as to the details of the circular. And last but not least, also with us, Alexandre Brajou, who is a senior manager within the regulatory risk and compliance team of Arendt Regulatory Consulting. So you will have the occasion to ask some questions. Feel free to use the button which is on your screen. If time allows, we will obviously answer to your question at the end of the session. If they have not been answered during our discussion, we will endeavor to revert individually to each of you with specific answers to this question. So do not hesitate to raise a question you want to raise. So without further ado, I would like Josiane to ask you to set the scene. From a CSSF perspective, I understand that they do not necessarily see the circular as a revolution, but as an evolution. It's quite obvious to say, and this is what has been said since the circular has been issued, because from their perspective, they are actually including past practice, which has now been dated since 2022, and to codify existing administrative and market practice in one single text. This being said, as we know, devils might be in the details. The circular is a little bit less than 50 pages, so it means that there are some points of attention by definition. And we would like to start with you to set the scene, as I said, and to highlight the salient points of the circular.
Okay, thank you, Florence. Good afternoon to the audience. I would like here to speak about 6 points, really. The first being the net asset value error thresholds. So for UCITS funds, these thresholds, they remain largely unchanged. For money market funds, though, attention, because the threshold is lowered to 0.20% from currently 0.25%. And we have a new threshold for other assets that is of 1%. Now you will, for those of you who have been curious and who have looked at the circular, you will have seen that there is flexibility to determine higher thresholds. However, for UCITS funds, this flexibility is not available. No matter how complex the policy is, you have to stick to the thresholds that are in the circular. Obviously, you can set lower thresholds or even have no tolerance at all. Now, the scope of non-compliance with investment rules was considerably enlarged. However, already in practice, the CSSF considers today that if you have a violation of rules that apply to UCITS funds, be they from EU regulations or ESMA opinions, whatever, the CSSF considers them to be breaches, but it's not officially written down. And so it will be codified into the new circular, and that will be the end of what was a grey area until the new circular. Now, the new circular also specifically talks to us about other errors. Other errors typically is when you pay fees that are higher than those that are indicated in the prospectus. Again, considering this to be an error falling under the circular is not new, because it's reflecting the administrative practice of the CSSF that is disclosed today in their annual reports. But again, it is now written in the circular. The examples given in the circular are not exhaustive. Now, a very important point is the subscription via the financial intermediaries, because what we have today in the 0277 is that the head office of the UCITS, meaning the central administration, must remit the indemnification monies to the financial intermediary, and then the financial intermediary in turn must commit that it will pay out the final investors. Now, under the new circular, the default position is that it is the UCITS fund's obligation to make sure that the final investors are being paid. Now, if that is not feasible, then the prospectus must be updated, and there must be a clear warning saying that the investors that are not directly in the register, that their rights of indemnification may be impacted. Another important point, the intraday breaches. So if you read today the FAQ on 0277, you will see that the CSSF says intraday breaches must be reported and must be indemnified. Now, in the new circular, this is somehow clarified in that intraday breaches occur if you are in breach of eligibility rules during the day, or if you are in breach of your exposure to a single issuer. The other quantitative limits, they will be checked or have to be checked at the point of net asset value calculation and will have to be indemnified if there is a breach at that point in time. Nonetheless, the CSSF will expect that procedures are in place to avoid as much as possible even intraday breaches of quantitative limits. And then a last point I wanted to mention is the intervention of the auditor on an immediate basis. That intervention will be required if the amount to be indemnified in total exceeds 50,000 euros or 5,000 per investor. And that is a bit more flexible than what we have today, where we stand at 25,000 and 2.5 respectively.
Thank you. So there are some good news.
Indeed.
But still actions to be taken, definitely. You mentioned the extended scope of the circular, at least with additional precision as to the type of breaches, errors, which need to be considered. And actually, I believe the motto is anything which is negatively impacting investors or the UCI needs to be taken into account. But you did not mention anything about ESG commitment or rules, and we all know that it has been heavily debated. And expectation is probably that that would also be covered, because the circular is referring to quantitative, qualitative. But what do you want to say on that one?
What do I want to say? It's a very good question, first of all. It's true that the circular is not outspoken about ESG breaches. However, we know that the CSSF considers these commitments that are given, be they, as you said, qualitative or quantitative, they consider them to be rules as any other investment rules that are being determined for a sub-fund, and therefore breaches will indeed trigger the application of the circular. What is a bit unclear is how the actors should handle that in practice. So how do you determine really a financial impact of the violation, so to say, of a binding commitment? And it is there where we really expect some clarifications via an FAQ that the CSSF will issue with the circular, but I have no idea what the timing of that FAQ is.
So in the meantime, I suspect it will be up to management bodies to take that on board and to assess the way they would like to, they would believe or need to apply the provision of the circular, waiting that Q&A from the CSSF.
Correct.
Thank you very much. So let's deep further in the practical aspects of the circular. We have spoken about quantitative and qualitative. When it goes about quantitative, it brings to the measurements of the impact more generally. So we know that the CSSF has always accepted different type of methodologies, but I believe with this circular, they come to be more strict in terms of expectation. So Alexandre, if you want maybe to explain what are the expectations from the CSSF in terms of the rules or requirements for the correction and the impact calculation, be it in the context of net asset value calculation error, but also investment breaches.
Certainly, Florence. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, generally speaking, when it comes to accounting methods on impact calculations, the new circular basically is more gathering different concepts on methodology that were either previously stated in the former 0277 circular or in the related FAQ. Basically, if we have a look on the NAV errors, for example, the new circular reiterates that for the computations of the NAV error, it's still possible to use two methodologies, either the compute method or the non-compute method. What do we mean by the compute methodology? Is that in that case, is it possible to take into consideration direct impact of the NAV errors, but also you can include the indirect impact on the NAV errors related to the subscription on redemptions received by the UCI during the period of the NAV error. In addition, when it comes to the computation of the indemnifications at investor level in case of NAV error, the circular reiterates that it's possible to apply the netting here. So basically, you can take into consideration all subscription on the redemption of a single investor during the NAV error period in order to compute the final impact. If we have a look on the indemnification mechanisms that can be used by UCI following a NAV error, here again, the new circular allows UCI to provide indemnification through the issuance of new shares, as it was already offered by the former circular. Even if in the new circular it not clearly mentioned that entry fees must be not taken into consideration, but we assume that it will be also the case. It makes sense not to charge investor in that case. When the UCI use the intermediary financial intermediary, for distributing the shares, as previously mentioned by Josiane, it's by default up to the UCI to ensure that they have sufficient arrangement in place to ensure that any intermediary, or basically the distributor, are able to ultimately reimburse the final investor, especially in case of nomini, where at the level of the fund register you can only have one line, but below the different investors. And one last point with regard to NAV error, in case such error will benefit to specific investors, the circular still offers the possibility to claim back this amount, but of course it has to be taken into consideration that such claimback can be only done for well-informed or professional investor. So definitely it's still forbidden for retail investors. To continue, maybe you can speak a bit on investment breaches. So in that case, still, it is offers the possibility for UCI to use either accounting method or the economic method. But here it's clearly stated that it has to be clearly defined in the procedure applicable at the level of the UCI, which method will be used. And when a specific method is used, it is important that to ensure that this method is used in a consistent manner across the different same kind of breaches. And as well, it can be defined at the fund level, but most of the time it should be at the fund level. But here again, the consistency is really a key aspect that is highlighted in the circular. And as well, it has to be always in the interest of the shareholders.
Just wondering if I can comment on this one, because this is quite an important change for my organization. So in the past, we had lots of different breaches, and often we were selecting the approach, so accounting versus economic, depending on the nature of the breach. And especially when you had a lot of subsequent error, the economic approach was often more suitable. And now we see that we'll have less flexibility, as you mentioned. So we see that now we'll have to go for one approach and not the other anymore. So less flexibility and also more things to document, as you mentioned, in our procedure and policy on that regard. Also, an important side effect of that is that we'll have also to train some of our colleagues in London and in the US so that they are also familiar with such a process, because they are also working on compensation for UCITS account in case of error.
Yeah, definitely it will be very important for a UCI manager to ensure that everything is defined in advance. And yes, even if in principle you may change the methodology, we have to keep in mind that such change is not possible after occurrence of the breach, but really before only.
Except if you were claiming and evidencing, I believe that this is in the interest of shareholders.
Yes, definitely. In that case, it's still possible, but still, I think we can expect that it has to be duly justified.
Yeah, but at least what we can keep from that, which is an important change, is the need for management company, management bodies to assess which kind of methodology they want to apply on a fund-by-fund level, which needs to be done, as you said, prior the occurrence of any of these events.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that will be a work that all investment manager will have to work on before the year end and then turning into force of the new circular.
Changing the momentum to some extent. Is there anything else you want to add on the methodologies?
No, not myself.
Thank you very much. So, thank you for your practical insight. This is exactly what we want to bring to this audience. On one of the identified change, if I can say so, or at least clarification, is the fact that the CSSF in the circular is now very precise as to the responsibilities and the duties from the different bodies which are involved in the day-to-day UCITS management or administration. We see that management bodies are expected to endorse clear roles and responsibilities. So back to you, Josiane, can you please take us through the action points that well-behaving board of directors or management company would need to take in advance of that entry into force of the circular, which is, again, January, but still a lot on the plate, I believe.
Yes, I think you're right. Let me start maybe with the current regime. So currently under 0277 itself, the onus is on the head office of the UCITS, so on the central administration. That must have measures in place to avoid, of course, to the extent possible, any errors, or to detect them, and then to inform the relevant stakeholders, the CSSF, the auditor, to intervene in the remediation process and all that. The correction measures that are taken for net asset value errors must be taken in charge by the head office of the UCITS. And in case of non-compliance with investment rules, it is the board of the UCITS fund that must take the necessary steps to regularize the situation. Now, this is what is in the 0277. If you look at the FAQ on the 0277, you already see that the CSSF is really expecting management companies to take an active role in the process and on their end to also have policies and procedures in place to ensure their compliance with the guidelines. So it is, even though the new circular is more granular than the FAQ, it is not something that comes to management companies as a completely new thing. However, as you said, Florence, the devil is in the detail, and so they will have to examine their existing policies and procedures to identify any gaps. Now, I have to read it because it's a bit of a long list that I thought to have identified in the circular of the items that they need to be careful about more particularly. And that would be starting with the determination and application of the materiality thresholds, depending on the type of UCITS or subfund, and also taking into account the registrations of the UCITS funds and the consequent potential lower thresholds by the host jurisdiction. Criteria to determine active and passive breaches, and then, as François and Alexandre discussed before, the impact determination methods must be laid down, as well as approval procedures in case there is a proposed change in the determination method. And what the CSSF says is that the economic method is only available if it is formally laid down in the policy. Then management companies have to have in place measures to monitor progress of passive breaches and regularization within a reasonable time frame, measures to verify if the impact of a non-compliance with investment rules also have a significant impact on the net asset value calculation, pre- and post-trade controls of investment and divestment decisions, measures to determine if in the presence of an error other than the 4 other errors that are in the circular are nonetheless to be considered to fall under the circular and to be indemnified, because we have seen that the examples under other errors are not exhaustive. If we are in a case of underpayment of fees, and if corrective measures are taken to somehow have the UCITS pay the underpaid fees, then measures must be in place to make sure that the investors that were not concerned by these fees do not suffer any prejudice. If there is an incorrect application of cut-off times, then measures must be in place to detect if this non-compliance is not also on top a non-compliance with the late trading circular. And then the last point I noted is the determination of an applicable de minimis rule. You would also have to determine what this de minima amount is and justify this minimum. Now, if we have a management company of a UCITS FCP, the management company will also have to make sure that the necessary prospectus disclosures are in place, and the case being investors are notified. Management companies must, and we have already heard that before, also look into their contractual arrangements with their delegates to make sure if the agreements really allow the management company to comply with its obligations. Now, all that, the audience here is management company. However, the fund boards, they cannot be totally out of the game and consider themselves not concerned. The first point to consider is, of course, if you have a SICAV, the SICAV board is the body that is ultimately responsible and liable for the proper conduct of the company. And in that role, one would expect that the fund board at least reviews the policies of the management company, approves them, has the right to ask questions, but also supervises the management company in the day-to-day implementation of these requirements. Then the CSSF also explicitly states in its circular that it expects that fund boards actively monitor passive breaches and the regularization of these breaches within a reasonable time. UCITS CCAF boards, they will also be responsible to update the prospectus and to the case being notify the shareholders. And then the last point, the expectations of the auditors. So we see that increasingly the auditors, they expect the fund boards to be really actively involved in the whole 0277 and 24856 procedures.
A long list. A long list indeed. And if not wrong, so we see definitely additional interaction with the different bodies, with clarification as to where and how each should act and behave. Additional interaction from the fund board also vis-à-vis the regulator, I would say. And except if mistaken, the circular is also providing for a specific deadline for the communication of the breaches, which was not necessarily expressly mentioned by the text before, but it was more something which was endorsed by practice.
If I'm not mistaken, but I will be corrected, the delay to notify breaches is in the CSSF form, the notification form, and it is 4 to 8 weeks. And this is, as you say, this is now laid down in the circular. There will be a new notification form. So again, no indication about timing for this new form, but it is fair to say that the CSSF is really watching the time by which they are notified of the errors, and they are not very happy if the notification does not come within the imposed period.
With a deadline, if not mistaken, for the auditors, as from the notification which has been done to provide a report in addition. So behind that long list of things to be taken into account, François, there is again a practical implication, practical aspect. When we have been preparing this session, you mentioned that you have already, of course, started to look at the way you will implement at Wellington. So concretely speaking, what can you say as to the action you have been already taken today, and of course, what is your plan towards implementation deadline?
That's a good point, and basically we have identified 3 work streams for our management company. The first one is about updating policies and procedure. We have identified already 3 of them. So the one covering swing pricing, the one on NAV error, and also the and also the one on investment breaches. So there will be a couple of updates to be made, and also an extension of the scope. So we expect that a couple of pages will be added to those policies that will have to be finalized by the end of the year, so that we are ready for the new circular on the 1st of January. Another area where we will focus on is really updating the prospectus in line with what you said. So basically ensuring that we outline to fund investor that their indemnification right might be impacted if they subscribe via financial intermediaries. On the other hand, what we also plan to do is to review our distributor agreement to ensure that they are all in line with the spirit of the circular, and to see if potentially we need to adjust them or amend them. And then finally, as you mentioned, there is a requirement to have some collaboration and interaction with the external auditor and the depository in case of active breach. So what we plan to do is to have some workshop with them before the implementation of the circular, so that we are all on the same page before next year.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the action to review your distribution agreement, and obviously by reading the circular, we have noticed the expectation that normally you would go beyond financial intermediary, but still hopefully the possibility, if not possible, to inform investors by way of the prospectus update and then to escape from that. From maybe a simple perspective, one could expect that you could have a one-fits-all approach to some extent, by simply stating in prospectuses, we will stop at the financial intermediary and up to the financial intermediary to indemnify beyond the beneficial owners. I understand that you definitely take a more refined approach. So you will be looking in each and every distribution agreement.
Well, that's correct. So what we want to do, first of all, is to update the prospectus to ensure that we comply with the new circular. But we also believe that we cannot ignore the spirit of the circular. So what we're going to do on the long run is basically review our distribution agreement to see if there is a way maybe to fine-tune them and to improve them, especially for new relationship with distributor. I would also say that we'll have to deal with maybe the difference we have across geographical area. So it might not be as easy as previously thought, but we will for sure work on that.
Mm-hmm. Which is a huge burden of work, I would say, because if you have a broad distribution network, this would trigger a lot of review and maybe discussion also with distributor, which are not necessarily
I totally agree.
Understanding the purpose of this.
So here, I think it will be a trade-off in between being fully aligned with the spirit of the circular, but also ensuring that we have something which is pragmatic enough for all our distributors. So it's something we will consider, but we still have to work on that and to see basically where we will set the bar.
Okay, interesting. Josiane, you wanted to...
Yeah, so I absolutely wanted to agree with you with respect to the spirit of the circular. So let's say the position of the CSSF is that it must be ensured that the final investor is indemnified, and it is really only in the exceptional case, an exceptional case that in practice may very well be the norm, given the way in which Luxembourg funds are distributed. But still, it is something that I would also see having to be justified, in which cases you go for the prospectus disclosure and in which cases that you have still the possibility to take contractual arrangements. So I would say this is really the approach should not be to say, oh, we have the prospectus disclosure, that's it, but the approach should be what you intend to make an inventory and to see, okay, what can we do and where can we put that into place, and where do we have to protect ourselves with the prospectus disclosure.
A lot of focus on the review of the distribution agreement, but we did not mention, I believe, the need to review also investment management agreement.
Central administration.
And central administration agreement, which is also another stream of work, probably, because I suspect you would need to ensure that your investment managers, in case you would not necessarily use internal bodies, would also be very well aware of all these rules. I have also in mind, based on past practices, some cases where indeed we were a little bit beyond or outside investment restrictions breaches, what we used to call operational breaches. Was it about the component of an index or whatever? In that instance, we were escaping, sometimes with the vetting of the auditors, from the application of the circular. I believe it will not be the case anymore. So probably also additional rules or messages to be shared with the investment managers and the bodies in charge. I don't know if from a practical perspective, this is also something you had in mind.
So that's a good point. And as I mentioned before, we have a couple of people who are assisting us on the computation of an error. And typically they ignore those kind of requirements. So it means that we'll have to train them and to see how we're going to further collaborate on that topic. But I would say in my organization, at the end, we are really the one in charge of the computations. We are receiving outputs from different part of the organization, from the investment manager, but we'll be the one having the final say on it.
And speaking about computation, this is also driving additional difficulties, I suspect, if you need to look at each and every beneficial owner.
For this for sure, but just maybe I wanted to add a few words with regard to investment restriction breaches, and especially if we are talking about third-party mancos, which are dealing with different portfolio managers. Of course, it will be key when having updating the procedure on to set the different methodology to be used for the impact calculation. It will be a large amount of work to communicate that to the portfolio manager, because most of the time they are responsible for reimbursing the fund in case of losses. And of course, in that case, it's important that everybody will be at the same page at portfolio management level, but as well as for party manco level.
And we know how much sometimes it can be difficult to explain these rules to the one who are not necessarily based in
as it has
Luxembourg.
been mentioned by Josiane, now the timeline to notify breaches is quite short. So we know as well that sometimes it can take a few time to discuss with portfolio manager with regard to the classification of a breach, and then to discuss the impact calculation. So clearly it's a key point that everybody will be at the same page when the procedure will be updated and the proper methodology for computing the impact will be fixed.
Thank you very much. We are slowly but surely reaching to the end of the webinar, and I wanted to ask to each of you maybe to provide one tip to the audience. From your angle, Josiane, who has been reading the circular, preparing it, but also from your François with that practical view, and of course Alexandre. So I don't know who want to start. Josiane?
Maybe I can start because I forgot to mention something, so my tip will then come
Not
later.
too late.
But what I forgot to mention is that EU management companies that manage Luxembourg UCITS, they are also falling under the circular with respect to how the errors and non-compliances need to be handled. So also management company agreement possibly to be reviewed. So that will definitely be for the SICA fund board to make sure that this is adequately covered.
Indeed. Maybe your tip then, since you are speaking.
Okay, so I will continue with the tip. Right, so my tip, go and see your lawyers so that they can help you obviously draft the appropriate wording for the prospectus and also assist you in reviewing the agreements with the different service providers.
François?
So my tip would be a bit in line with yours. I think like if we update the prospectus, we need to go to the board, to the executive committee, so it takes a lot of time. And in my organization, we'll try to do it as soon as possible because we are a bit worried of missing the deadline at the end of the year.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and for me, my tip would be really to focus on the update of the operational procedure, and especially the one with regard to investment breaches, and the choice of the different method to be used per kind of breaches, and just to ensure that even once approved the procedure, everybody, all the stakeholders are in line and are aware of the methodology chosen in fine, and then to ensure a smooth process in case of the occurrence of breach and to avoid any discussions that may delay the breach notification to the CSSF ultimately.
Thank you. I will not give a tip, but I will probably make a statement that the fact that the circular is nearly 50 pages and the fact also that the regulator has granted nearly 6 months deadline to implement is, I believe, not harmless and is probably meaning something that behind the assumption that this is not more than a codification of an existing practice, again, there is a need to understand and to endorse what are the changes to be implemented to processes, procedure, documents. So this is quite a work. So the sooner, the better, probably, to do a gap analysis and to assess what are the concrete actions to be taken. So we have reached the end of the webinar. I would like to thank you, the three of you, for having giving this insightful perspective of the circular. And indeed, we are ready to assist you further. We have a few minutes to take 1 or 2 questions that we have been receiving. Maybe the first one would be for you, Josiane. Again, about that possibility to go beyond the financial intermediary in case of indemnification. There is an expectation, if it's not the case, that investors would be informed. When it goes about UCITS, expectation is that it would be an information to be provided in the document, in the prospectus. And the CSSF is saying, I believe, at the next update of the prospectus. So what would your advice to immediately start by updating the prospectus, noting that you might have a discrepancy between the fact that until year end you still apply O277, if I'm not wrong. So how would you manage? Because as mentioned by François, this is also a process, and it's not only amending prospectus, but it's also getting board decision. So that would be one question in that context. And also, is that sufficient, or would you also require a specific notification to your investors?
To take the first part, indeed, as you say, the CSSF say at the next occasion, and that for me means like even before the 1st of January. Something that the CSSF and we tend to forget is exactly what you said, like the time you need to get the internal organization to approve changes. And so even if it is started like imminently, it will still be very much towards the end of the year for some before the prospectus can be updated. It is true what you say, Florence, the classic wording that you would include in the prospectus would not yet apply until the 1st of January. However, it is better really to include it as soon as you only can, and then to footnote it as you do for other changes by saying this will be applicable from the 1st of January. Now, UCITS funds, they are indeed obliged to update their prospectuses. Other fund structures are not obliged to do so. But it may very well be that the UCITS is not ready on time with a prospectus containing that wording. And in this case, the circular foresees that you have to inform your investors via the usual notification channels. So in that case, you would need to send them a letter informing them of this warning. Now, do you have to do both? So in other words, if you update your prospectus now, would you on top have to inform your investors? This is not what I read into the circular. I would, however, say if you notify for any other reasons, I would recommend to nonetheless include it as an information. There is no action to be taken, but still, if you anyhow notify, I would include it. But a specific notification on top of prospectus update, I would not see that.
Okay, good to know. Personal thinking here, I believe if we were to insert something in a notification, which makes sense, as you said, if you change the prospectus for many changes and this one is included, it makes sense to cover this. It remains to see which kind of wording we would include, because it's not necessarily easy to explain what has not been done in the past and will need to be done going forward, or the contrary. So something to be think on and not as obvious as it seems at first sight, I would say. So thank you very much. I believe we are reaching the end and will not be able to take additional questions, but we do undertake to revert to each and every question which has been asked, and we will obviously do so. So I would like to close this webinar by thanking all the audience, obviously, to have been with us today. Also to thanks again the three persons who were here with me, and also invite you to join us for our next UCITS dedicated seminar, which is scheduled for the 6th of June, and which will cover ESG impact from a UCITS perspective again. And it might be that in the meantime, why not, we would have received that CSSF Q&A tackling the ESG breaches in that context of the discussion we had today. So thank you very much, and see you at the next occasion. Have a good day.